What would you do if a bride publicly humiliated her groom's mother in front of 200 wedding guests, only to discover minutes later that the woman she mocked was connected to the one man powerful enough to change everything? At a luxury Dallas wedding, 62-year-old Loretta Johnson came for one reason: to watch her son start a new life. Instead, she found herself blamed, insulted, and publicly slapped in front of a silent crowd. But while she walked away with dignity, something unexpected was already moving toward the hotel. A fleet of black Escalades, and inside one of them sat a man whose life had once been saved by Loretta's kindness. Before the night was over, the people who judged her would learn a lesson they would never forget. The Grand Meridian Hotel glittered like a jewel in the heart of downtown Dallas. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling in cascading layers of light. White roses overflowed from towering centerpieces. Soft jazz drifted through the ballroom, while servers in black uniforms moved silently between tables carrying silver trays of champagne. Everything about the evening looked perfect. The guests certainly thought so. More than 200 people filled the ballroom, dressed in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns. Wealthy business owners, attorneys, local politicians, and socialites laughed beneath the warm golden lights. Every corner of the room seemed designed to impress. At the center of it all stood Ashley Carlisle. She looked exactly like the bride she had always imagined becoming. Her satin gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Diamonds sparkled around her neck. Professional photographers followed her every movement. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Across the room stood Marcus Johnson, tall, handsome, nervous. The groom smiled politely as guests approached him one after another. But every few minutes his eyes drifted toward a different part of the ballroom, toward a woman sitting quietly near the edge of the room. Loretta Johnson, his mother. At 62 years old, Loretta looked nothing like the women surrounding her. She wore a navy blue dress she had purchased from a discount store weeks earlier. The fabric was simple. The shoes on her feet had been carefully polished that morning until they looked almost new. A string of modest pearls rested around her neck. She sat with perfect posture and a gentle smile. No one looking at her would have guessed how many years she had spent working before sunrise and after sunset. No one would have guessed how many sacrifices had been stitched into the quiet lines of her face. But Marcus knew, or at least he should have. Loretta watched him from across the ballroom. Every time their eyes met, she smiled. Every time he smiled back. And for a few brief moments, she forgot about the whispers. She forgot about the sideways glances. She forgot about the fact that nobody from Ashley's family had spoken to her for more than 30 seconds all evening. Because tonight wasn't about her. It was about her son. The little boy she had raised alone. The little boy who used to fall asleep on her shoulder after church. The little boy who once told her he would buy her a castle someday. Now he was getting married. And that was enough. At least, she kept telling herself it was. The reception moved smoothly through dinner. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. The band played softly. Outside, the Dallas skyline glowed against the night sky. Inside, everything seemed effortless. Until it wasn't. Loretta had stepped away from her table near the end of the meal. She wanted a fresh napkin. Nothing more. She moved carefully through the crowd, avoiding photographers and servers. As she approached one of the cocktail tables, she noticed Ashley standing nearby with several friends. The bride was laughing loudly. The group seemed to stop talking the moment they noticed Loretta approaching. An uncomfortable silence lingered. Loretta offered a polite smile. No one returned it. She continued walking. Then suddenly, a gasp echoed across the room. Ashley looked down. A splash of deep red wine spread across the front of her wedding gown. The stain seemed to bloom instantly against the white satin. Conversations stopped. Music faded into the background. Heads turned. For a second, nobody moved. Then Ashley's face changed. Shock. Then anger. Then something colder. She lifted her eyes and pointed directly at Loretta. "You did this." The words sliced through the room. Loretta froze. "What? You bumped into me." Ashley took a step forward. "You ruined my dress." Loretta blinked, confused. She knew she hadn't touched Ashley. Several nearby guests knew it too. They had seen exactly what happened, or rather, what hadn't happened. But no one spoke. "Ashley," Loretta said gently, "I didn't touch you. You expect me to believe that?" The bride's voice grew louder. Guests began gathering around them. Phones appeared. The photographers instinctively shifted closer. Ashley pointed at the spreading stain. "Look at this." Her voice cracked dramatically. "My wedding dress." Loretta felt every eye in the ballroom settle on her. Still, she remained calm. "I'm sorry your dress is stained," she said softly. "But I wasn't near enough to—" "Stop lying." The room became even quieter. Somewhere a champagne glass clinked against a table. Then silence again. Ashley stepped closer. "You always do this." Loretta frowned. The accusation made no sense. But Ashley wasn't talking about wine anymore. Years of resentment seemed to pour out of her. "You never understood boundaries. Ashley, you never belonged here." The words hit harder than Loretta expected, not because they were new, but because they were finally being spoken aloud. The room shifted. People exchanged glances. Nobody intervened. Nobody defended her. Loretta looked across the crowd. She searched for Marcus, found him standing near the dance floor, found him watching, found him frozen. Their eyes met. For one brief second, she expected him to move, to say something, anything. He didn't. Ashley saw it too, and somehow that seemed to make her bolder. "You've embarrassed us from the beginning." Loretta's heart sank. "Ashley, you know what?" The bride's voice rose again. "Someone like you should never have been invited." The crowd collectively inhaled. Loretta felt the sting of humiliation spreading through her chest. Not for herself, for Marcus, for what this moment was becoming, for the years she had spent trying to make his life easier. Ashley stepped forward again, her face twisted with anger. Then it happened. A sharp movement, a sudden sound, a collective gasp from the crowd. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Loretta's head turned slightly, not from force, from surprise. More than surprise. Disbelief. The music stopped completely. No one moved. No one spoke. For a moment, all Loretta could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. Ashley stood rigid, breathing heavily. The stain on her dress looked darker now beneath the lights. Around them, 200 guests watched. Marcus stood motionless. His face had gone pale. Loretta looked at him, really looked at him, waiting, hoping, praying. Still nothing. The silence hurt more than anything else. Far more than Ashley's anger. Far more than the humiliation. Far more than the crowd. Because in that moment, Loretta understood something she had been refusing to see all evening. Her son was no longer protecting her, and maybe he hadn't been for a long time. The realization settled quietly inside her, heavy, final. She lowered her eyes, took a slow breath, then bent down and picked up the small clutch purse she had set on a nearby chair. No speech, no argument, no tears. Just dignity. The same dignity that had carried her through widowhood, through poverty, through loneliness, through decades of hard work. She straightened her dress, lifted her chin, and walked toward the ballroom doors. The crowd parted automatically. Nobody stopped her. Nobody followed. Not even Marcus. Loretta crossed the marble floor beneath the chandeliers, past the tables, past the flowers, past the people who suddenly found great interest in their champagne glasses. The giant doors opened. Cool night air waited beyond them. As she stepped into the hotel lobby, the sounds of the reception faded behind her. And for the first time all evening, she allowed herself one question. Not about Ashley. Not about the guests. Not even about the slap. The question was about Marcus. And the answer frightened her, because she wasn't sure she knew her son anymore. Outside, beyond the revolving doors of the Grand Meridian, the Texas night stretched dark and quiet. Loretta had no idea that before the hour was over, a fleet of black Escalades would pull into that driveway, and every person who had remained silent inside that ballroom would wish they hadn't. But that moment was still ahead. Hours earlier, before the music stopped, before the stain on the wedding dress, before the silence that hurt more than any insult ever could, the day had begun very differently. The Texas sun had barely risen when Loretta Johnson stood in the small kitchen of her modest brick house in Oak Cliff. The neighborhood was quiet. A city bus rumbled somewhere in the distance. Morning light filtered through lace curtains she had hung herself 15 years earlier. The house wasn't large. The furniture didn't match. The refrigerator made a strange humming sound every few minutes. But it was home. Every inch of it carried memories. On the counter sat a peach cobbler cooling beside the window. Loretta smiled as she looked at it. Marcus had loved peach cobbler since he was 6 years old. Whenever life became difficult, whenever school was hard, whenever money was tight, a warm slice of peach cobbler somehow made things feel manageable again. Some traditions never changed. She carefully covered the dish with foil. Then she checked the clock. The wedding wasn't until the afternoon, but Loretta had always believed that important days deserved extra time, especially today. She walked into her bedroom. A photograph sat on the dresser. Thomas Johnson smiled back at her from inside a simple wooden frame. 22 years had passed since he died. Some days it felt like yesterday. Other days it felt like another lifetime. Loretta touched the frame gently. "Our boy's getting married today," she whispered. The room remained silent, but she could almost hear Thomas laughing, the way he always had. Warm, steady, comforting. She smiled through the sudden sting in her eyes. Then she picked up her navy blue dress, the one she had purchased 3 weeks earlier after visiting 4 different discount stores. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't fashionable. But it was clean, elegant, respectful. And most importantly, it was all she could afford. By 10 o'clock, she was ready. A neighbor named Mrs. Jenkins drove her to the Grand Meridian Hotel. The moment the massive building came into view, Loretta felt small. Glass, steel, marble, valets opening doors, luxury cars lined up along the entrance. Everything seemed designed for people who had never worried about paying rent. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Jenkins said. Loretta laughed softly. "You're a good liar." "I'm serious." Loretta squeezed her friend's hand, then stepped out of the car carrying the peach cobbler. The hotel's revolving doors turned silently. Cold air rushed from the lobby. Inside, polished marble floors reflected golden light from crystal chandeliers. People moved with purpose. Wedding planners, florists, photographers. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed important. Loretta adjusted her purse strap and smiled at the young receptionist who directed her toward the ballroom. The smile wasn't returned. It wasn't rude, just absent. The sort of thing most people never noticed. Loretta noticed. Years of experience had taught her to notice. She simply kept walking. Inside the ballroom, preparations were underway. Workers adjusted centerpieces. Servers arranged silverware. Musicians tuned instruments near the stage. Everything looked perfect. Almost. Loretta spotted Marcus immediately. He was standing near the altar area reviewing something with the wedding coordinator. For a second, she saw not the grown man in an expensive tuxedo, but the little boy who used to run through sprinklers during summer evenings. The little boy who used to hold her hand, crossing busy streets. Marcus turned. Their eyes met. His entire face brightened. "Mom!" The word echoed through the ballroom. Several heads turned. Marcus hurried across the room and wrapped her in a hug. A real hug. Not rushed. Not distracted. For a moment, Loretta felt her heart settle. Maybe everything would be okay after all. "You look amazing," Marcus said. She laughed. "Now I know you're lying. I'm serious." He stepped back. "You really do." His eyes dropped to the peach cobbler. "You made one? You sound surprised. You always make one." "Exactly." Marcus smiled. For a brief moment he looked genuinely happy. Then someone called his name. The wedding planner, the photographer, the best man. Loretta wasn't sure, only that the moment vanished almost immediately. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. "I'll come find you later. Take your time." He nodded, then disappeared into the organized chaos. Loretta watched him go. A familiar feeling settled inside her. Pride and loneliness, often together. An hour later, guests began arriving. The Carlyle family arrived first. Ashley Carlyle's parents moved through the room like people accustomed to owning every space they entered. Richard Carlyle wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit. Diane Carlyle wore diamonds that sparkled every time she turned her head. Both smiled often. Neither smile reached their eyes. Loretta had met them before, several times. She doubted either one remembered much about her. When Diane passed nearby, Loretta offered a warm greeting. "Good afternoon." Diane paused, for half a second, then gave a polite nod, the kind reserved for strangers, not future family. "Hello." And then she kept walking. Loretta watched her disappear into the crowd. The rejection wasn't dramatic, just familiar. She had spent most of her life receiving that exact version of it. A young hostess eventually approached carrying a seating chart. "Mrs. Johnson? That's me." The hostess smiled professionally. "Allow me to show you to your table." Loretta followed, past the dance floor, past the main stage, past the front tables reserved for family, past another row, and another, until they reached the far left corner of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a massive marble column. Table 27. The view of the stage was blocked, the dance floor barely visible. Most of the guests seated there appeared confused about why they had been invited at all. Loretta stared for a moment, then smiled politely. "Thank you." The hostess hurried away. Loretta sat down. Across from her sat an elderly man she had never met. Beside him, a distant co-worker of Marcus from a previous job. The remaining seats slowly filled with people who seemed disconnected from the wedding itself. Nobody from the Carlyle family sat there. Nobody from the bridal party. Nobody important. At least according to whoever arranged the seating chart. Loretta placed the peach cobbler carefully beneath her chair. Around her, the room grew louder. Laughter echoed. Champagne glasses clinked. Guests hugged and greeted one another. But every now and then she noticed things. Little things. A glance that lingered too long. A smile exchanged between strangers after noticing her outfit. Two women whispering while looking toward her table. Nothing obvious. Nothing anyone could call cruel. Just enough. Enough to remind her that she occupied a different world from most of the people in that ballroom. A younger woman at a neighboring table glanced toward Loretta, then toward the stage, then back again. "Who is she?" she whispered. Her companion shrugged. "No idea." The words drifted across the room. Loretta pretended not to hear, but she did. She always heard. She had spent decades learning how to survive places where people assumed she didn't belong. By mid-afternoon, the ballroom was nearly full. The wedding ceremony would begin soon. Loretta folded her hands in her lap. The lights dimmed slightly. Guests settled into their seats. Music floated softly through the room. She looked toward the front row where the Carlyle family sat together, then toward the back where she sat alone. And for the first time that day, a question quietly surfaced. Not angry, not bitter, just honest. Why had Ashley never wanted her here? Loretta didn't know the answer. Not yet. But before the night was over, that answer would reveal itself in the cruelest way possible. And when it did, every hidden wound from this beautiful day would finally be exposed. The wedding was about to begin, and so was the first crack in the fairy tale. The string quartet began to play. Guests rose from their seats. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the grand staircase where Ashley Carlyle would soon make her entrance. From table 27, hidden behind the marble column, Loretta Johnson watched the room transform. The lights softened. The conversations faded. The atmosphere shifted from social gathering to carefully choreographed spectacle. Everything looked beautiful. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked fragile. Loretta folded her hands in her lap and smiled. No matter where they seated her, no matter how invisible she felt, she could not stop herself from feeling proud. Her son was getting married. That thought alone carried enough weight to silence most disappointments. As the music swelled, her mind drifted somewhere else. Not to the ballroom, not to the Carlyle family, not even to Marcus. Her thoughts traveled south across Dallas, back to Oak Cliff, back to New Hope Community Kitchen, back to the place that felt more like home than anywhere else. Every weekday morning, before sunrise painted the sky pink and gold, Loretta unlocked the back door of the small brick building on Jefferson Boulevard. The sign above the entrance had faded years ago. The paint peeled. The parking lot needed repairs. The roof leaked whenever storms rolled through Texas. Yet somehow the place felt alive, warm, important, needed. New Hope Community Kitchen wasn't funded by wealthy donors. It wasn't featured in magazines. No politicians came by for photographs. Most of Dallas barely knew it existed. But the people who needed it knew exactly where to find it. Single mothers, retired veterans, runaway teenagers, men sleeping in shelters, women living in cars, people forgotten by everyone else. Every morning they arrived before breakfast, and every morning Loretta greeted them by name. 3 days before the wedding, she had stood in the kitchen before dawn, tying on her apron as rain tapped softly against the windows. The industrial coffee maker hissed. Pots simmered. The smell of bacon and fresh biscuits drifted through the building. A volunteer named Denise was chopping onions. Another volunteer stacked trays near the serving line. Everything moved with familiar rhythm. The front door opened. Cold air entered. An elderly man named Harold shuffled inside. Harold had served in Vietnam. He wore the same army jacket every winter. The elbows were worn thin. The zipper barely worked. But he wore it proudly. "Mornin', Miss Loretta." "Mornin', Harold. You got any of those biscuits left?" Loretta laughed. "We haven't even opened yet." "Just checking." She handed him a steaming cup of coffee. Harold accepted it like someone receiving treasure. "Thank you." No need to thank me. But Harold always did. Across the room, a young mother entered carrying a sleeping toddler. Loretta immediately noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. She had seen that look before, many times. The look of someone carrying more weight than anyone should. Loretta prepared a tray herself. Extra fruit, extra eggs, extra kindness. The young mother nearly cried. That happened more often than people realized. Not because of the food, because someone noticed, because someone cared. That was the true purpose of New Hope. The meals mattered, but dignity mattered more. Years earlier, after Thomas died, Loretta had discovered that grief and hunger shared something in common. Both became easier to carry when someone sat beside you. No speeches, no solutions, just presence, just kindness. The kitchen had taught her that, or perhaps life had. By 7:30, the dining hall was full. Metal chairs scraped against the floor. Conversations echoed off old brick walls. Steam rose from coffee cups. Outside, buses rumbled past. Inside, people found temporary refuge. Near the far corner sat a teenage boy named Andre. He came twice a week, always alone, always quiet. Loretta carried a tray to his table. "You doing okay today?" The teenager shrugged. That usually meant no. She sat across from him, not pressing, not forcing conversation, just sitting. After a minute, he spoke. "My mom got evicted." Loretta nodded. "That's hard. We're staying at my aunt's place, I'm sorry." He stared down at his food. "You think things get better?" The question hung between them. Heavy, honest. Loretta looked around the room, at Harold, at the young mother, at the volunteers, at all the people trying despite everything. "I think people get stronger than they realize." Andre looked up. "You really believe that?" "I do." The boy nodded slowly. Years later, Loretta would not remember exactly what he ate that morning, but she would remember that conversation, because hope often arrived quietly, not with miracles, not with money, just one person refusing to give up on another. The morning passed. Breakfast became lunch. Volunteers cleaned tables. Donations were sorted. A church group arrived carrying boxes of canned goods. Life moved forward. Simple. Ordinary. Meaningful. The kitchen had become Loretta's second family, maybe even her first. Because while Marcus built his own life, New Hope filled the empty spaces, the loneliness, the silence, the long evenings. Helping others gave structure to pain, purpose to grief, meaning to sacrifice. Most people never understood that. Many assumed she volunteered because she was generous. That wasn't entirely true. Loretta needed New Hope almost as much as New Hope needed her. Late that afternoon, after the lunch crowd departed, Denise approached carrying paperwork. "You excited about the wedding?" Loretta smiled. "I am. You nervous?" "A little. You like Ashley?" The question caught her off guard. Loretta hesitated. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city. Rain streaked the windows. Denise waited. Loretta chose her words carefully. "I love Marcus." "That's not what I asked." Loretta laughed softly. "No, it isn't." Denise leaned against the counter. "You worried?" Loretta stared toward the empty dining room. Rows of vacant tables stretched beneath fluorescent lights. For some reason, she thought about Marcus at age 12. Marcus at 16. Marcus leaving for college. Marcus calling after his first promotion. Marcus crying after his father's funeral. Then she thought about Ashley, the distance, the coldness, the way Ashley sometimes looked at people. Not cruel exactly, just measuring, always measuring. "I'm not worried about the wedding. What are you worried about?" Loretta folded a towel slowly. "I'm worried about what happens after." Denise didn't ask another question. She didn't need to. Some concerns arrive without words. The storm outside intensified. Rain hammered the roof. For a moment the lights flickered. Loretta glanced toward the front windows. Water rushed along the street. Cars moved carefully through the weather. And suddenly, without warning, a memory surfaced. A man sitting alone in the snow. A pale face, shaking hands, eyes filled with exhaustion. A promise spoken in a weak voice. One day, I'll find you again. The memory disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. 8 years had passed. The man was probably gone, moved away, started over, forgotten. Life worked that way. People entered, people left. The important thing was helping when you could, nothing more, nothing less. Back in the Grand Meridian Ballroom, the applause erupted. Loretta blinked. The memory faded. Ashley had appeared at the top of the staircase. Guests stood smiling. Photographers rushed into position. Marcus stared upward. The ceremony was beginning, and somewhere deep inside Loretta, beneath the pride and excitement and loneliness, a strange feeling lingered. A feeling she couldn't explain, as if the day were moving towards something much larger than a wedding, as if old choices were quietly making their way back toward her. And as Ashley started down the aisle beneath a canopy of white roses and golden light, Loretta had no way of knowing that a promise made 8 years earlier was already racing toward Dallas. Closer with every passing mile, closer with every passing minute, closer with every heartbeat. And before this wedding night ended, the forgotten man from the snow would return. But 8 years earlier, on a winter night that most people in Dallas had already forgotten, he had been nothing more than another invisible man sitting alone in the cold. Texas wasn't known for snow. That was what made the storm so memorable. The weather reports had warned about it for days. Schools closed early. Grocery store shelves emptied. Drivers panicked. The entire city seemed unprepared for what was coming. By sunset, snowflakes drifted through the air above Oak Cliff. By midnight, the streets were covered in white. Inside her small house, Loretta Johnson sat beneath a lamp in the living room folding laundry, while an old weather report played quietly on television. Marcus was 23 then, recently graduated, recently employed, recently moved into his first apartment. The house felt different without him. Not empty, just quieter. A mother's ears never stopped listening for sounds that no longer existed. The creak of a bedroom door, footsteps in the hallway, the slam of a refrigerator, the ordinary noises of raising a child. Those sounds had disappeared, but the habit of listening remained. A sudden knock interrupted her thoughts. 3 quick taps, then silence. Loretta glanced at the clock. Nearly 11. She opened the front door. Mrs. Jenkins stood outside wrapped in a heavy coat. "You heading to New Hope tomorrow? If the road's clear." Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "They'll be packed." Loretta frowned. "What do you mean?" "The shelters are already overflowing." The older woman pointed toward the dark street. "They said people are sleeping in bus stations tonight." Loretta looked toward the falling snow. Her stomach tightened. She knew exactly what happened when temperatures dropped unexpectedly. The people with warm homes complained. The people without homes tried to survive. The storm suddenly looked different, much less beautiful. The next morning, Dallas woke beneath a blanket of white. Cars moved cautiously. Traffic lights reflected off frozen streets. The city felt strangely silent. Loretta arrived at New Hope before sunrise. The parking lot was nearly empty. Only a handful of volunteers had made it through the weather. Inside, the kitchen was already alive. Coffee brewed. Soup simmered. Volunteers filled containers with hot meals. The front doors opened continuously. People arrived shivering. People arrived exhausted. People arrived grateful. By noon, every seat was occupied. Some guests stayed for hours simply because the building was warm. Nobody seemed eager to return outside. Around 2 o'clock, Loretta carried several containers of soup toward the storage room in the back alley. The rear entrance opened. A gust of freezing wind rushed inside. She stepped outside. The alley behind New Hope stretched between old brick buildings and delivery docks. Snow covered everything: trash bins, parked vehicles, the cracked pavement. The city felt frozen. Then she noticed movement. Near the far corner, behind a dumpster. Someone sat against the wall, completely still. At first she thought it might be discarded clothing. Then the figure moved, slowly, painfully. Loretta immediately set down the containers. "Sir?" No response. She walked closer. The man looked to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. His coat was torn, his beard untrimmed. Snow had collected on his shoulders. His hands trembled violently. Most striking were his eyes, not because of fear, because of exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that lived deep inside a person, the exhaustion of someone who had been losing battles for a very long time. "Sir?" The man blinked, looked up. His lips moved. No sound came out. Loretta knelt beside him. "You okay?" A weak laugh escaped him. "No." The honesty startled her. Most people still tried to pretend, even at their worst. The man didn't. His face was pale, his breathing uneven. He looked ill, very ill. "Have you eaten today?" He shook his head. "When's the last time you ate?" A long pause followed. Then came the answer. "Don't remember." Loretta closed her eyes briefly. The words hit harder than she expected. Not because they were dramatic, because they sounded real. She stood immediately. "Don't go anywhere." The man almost smiled. "I don't think that's a risk." 10 minutes later, she returned carrying soup, bread, coffee, and a blanket. The man stared at the food. For several seconds, he didn't move. Then tears appeared in his eyes. Not dramatic tears, just quiet ones. The kind people try to hide. "You don't have to cry," Loretta said gently. "I'm not crying." "Of course." He laughed weakly, then began eating. Slowly at first, then faster, as though his body remembered hunger better than dignity. Loretta sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. Snow continued falling. The city remained silent. Finally, the man lowered his spoon. "Why are you helping me?" The question surprised her. "Because you need help." He studied her. "You don't know me." "No." "You don't know what I did." "No." "You don't know if I deserve it." Loretta smiled softly. "That's not how kindness works." For a moment, neither moved. The wind pushed snow through the alley. The man stared into his coffee cup. Then something changed in his expression. Not relief, not happiness. Something closer to disbelief, as though he had forgotten people like Loretta existed. "What is your name?" she asked. The man hesitated. A strange hesitation, long enough to notice. "William." "Nice to meet you, William." He nodded, then looked away. The following day he returned, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each morning, Loretta found him sitting quietly near the rear entrance, never asking for anything, never causing problems, never telling much about himself. Only fragments emerged. An accident, lost memories, lost work, lost relationships, lost direction. Everything vague, everything incomplete. Yet one fact became obvious. William was educated. His vocabulary, his posture, the way he spoke, none of it matched the appearance of a man living on the streets. Something about his story didn't fit. Loretta noticed. She simply chose not to pry. 1 week later, she found him collapsed beside the building. His skin burned with fever, his breathing shallow. The ambulance took too long. The emergency room demanded immediate paperwork and a deposit. Loretta remembered standing beneath harsh hospital lights while exhausted nurses hurried through crowded hallways. The amount wasn't enormous, but it wasn't small either. It represented nearly all the money she had saved to repair the leaking roof on her house. She stared at the number, then thought about William. Alone, sick, forgotten. The decision took less than 5 seconds. She handed over the money. The clerk processed the payment. Just like that. Years of savings disappeared. Loretta never regretted it. Not once. William remained hospitalized for several days. When he recovered enough to leave, she visited him. The room overlooked a parking garage. Gray skies filled the window. Machines beeped softly. William looked stronger, healthier, more present. When she entered, he smiled. The first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. "You came." "Of course I did." For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then he reached for her hand. His grip was weak, but steady. "I don't know how to repay you." Loretta laughed. "You don't." "I'm serious. So am I." The silence between them felt comfortable, almost familiar. Finally, William spoke. One sentence, simple, quiet, powerful. "One day I'll find you again." Loretta smiled. "I hope you find yourself first." A week later, he was gone. No goodbye, no forwarding address, no phone number, nothing. Just gone. Life moved on. The roof eventually got repaired. New Hope remained busy. Marcus built his career. Years passed. The memory faded. Not completely. Just enough. Sometimes, while serving breakfast, Loretta would wonder what happened to him. Whether he recovered, whether he found peace, whether he survived. But eventually, even those questions became less frequent. People came. People left. That was life. Back in the Grand Meridian Ballroom 8 years later, guests applauded as Marcus and Ashley exchanged vows beneath golden light and white roses. Loretta smiled politely from the back table. She had no way of knowing that the promise William made inside that hospital room had never been forgotten. Not for a single day. And somewhere beyond Dallas, a man who had once lost everything was finally on his way back to keep it. Inside the Grand Meridian Hotel, however, nobody knew that. The ceremony had ended beneath applause and smiles. Marcus Johnson and Ashley Carlisle had exchanged vows. Photographers captured perfect images. Guests wiped away sentimental tears. The newly married couple kissed beneath an arch of white roses. To anyone looking from the outside, it was the kind of wedding people remembered for years. The kind people posted online. The kind people envied. But perfection is often easiest to believe from a distance. Up close, tiny cracks had already begun to appear. The reception started shortly after sunset. The ballroom transformed once again. The ceremony chairs disappeared. The dance floor expanded. Candles flickered across linen-covered tables. A jazz quartet played softly near the stage. Waiters moved through the room carrying trays of champagne and sparkling water. The Dallas skyline glowed beyond the towering windows. Everything looked beautiful. Yet Loretta found herself feeling strangely tired. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of tiredness that comes from spending hours pretending certain things don't hurt. She remained at table 27, still behind the column, still far from the family tables, still watching everyone else celebrate from a distance. At first she told herself it didn't matter. Then she noticed something. The head table had room. Several empty seats remained near the dance floor. One of them even carried a small, reserved sign. Yet no one invited her forward. No one corrected the seating arrangement. No one seemed interested in fixing what everyone could clearly see. Loretta looked down at her folded napkin, then quietly pushed the thought away. Tonight wasn't about her. It never had been. Across the ballroom, Marcus was surrounded by guests, friends from work, college classmates, business contacts, members of Ashley's family. Every few minutes he glanced toward his mother. Their eyes would meet. He would smile. Then someone else would pull him away. At first Loretta found it reassuring. At least he hadn't forgotten about her. But as the evening progressed, something else began bothering her. Each time Marcus started walking in her direction, someone stopped him. Sometimes it was Ashley. Sometimes it was Ashley's mother. Sometimes it was one of the bridesmaids. The interruptions seemed harmless, small, insignificant. Yet after a while they formed a pattern, and patterns are difficult to ignore once you notice them. A little after 7, dinner was served. Guests at the front tables received their meals first, the head table next, then the family tables. Table 27 was among the last. The elderly gentleman beside Loretta chuckled as servers finally arrived. "Guess we're the forgotten section." Loretta smiled politely. "Looks that way." The old man shrugged. "I've been forgotten before." Something about the comment made them both laugh. A brief moment of warmth in an increasingly uncomfortable evening. The meal itself was excellent. Salmon, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. Far more expensive than anything Loretta would ever buy for herself. Yet she found she had little appetite. Instead, she spent most of dinner watching Marcus. Watching the little boy she once knew hidden somewhere inside the grown man sitting at the head table. At one point, Ashley leaned toward him, whispered something. Marcus glanced across the room toward his mother, then quickly looked away. The exchange lasted only seconds, but Loretta noticed. Again, years of experience had taught her to notice. She didn't know what Ashley said. She only knew she didn't like the expression on Marcus's face afterward. Near the stage, speeches began. The best man spoke first. Guests laughed. Then Ashley's sister. More laughter. Then Ashley's father. A lengthy speech about success, family legacy, and opportunity. The kind of speech wealthy men often give. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Loretta listened quietly. Eventually, she realized something. No one had asked her to speak. Not during the rehearsal, not during dinner, not during the reception. No mother of the groom toast. No acknowledgement. Nothing. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Not because she wanted attention. She truly didn't. But because she had spent weeks preparing something. A short speech. 3 handwritten note cards. Stories about Marcus growing up. Memories of Thomas. A blessing for their future. The cards remained inside her purse. Unread. Unused. Probably unnecessary. Loretta slipped her hand into her purse and touched them briefly. Then withdrew it. Across the ballroom, Ashley laughed loudly at something one of her friends said. The sound carried farther than intended. Several women gathered around her. Elegant women, expensively dressed. Women who looked perfectly at home in rooms like this. One of them glanced toward Loretta. then leaned close to Ashley. A few seconds later, the entire group laughed. Not openly, not cruelly enough to attract attention, but enough. Enough for Loretta to understand. She looked away. Outside the windows, darkness settled over Dallas. The city lights shimmered against the glass. Inside, the celebration continued. Yet something had changed. The warmth she felt during the ceremony was fading, replaced by a growing sense that she was being tolerated rather than welcomed, as if she had been invited because protocol demanded it, not because anyone actually wanted her there. A little later, while guests mingled between courses, Loretta excused herself and wandered toward one of the refreshment stations. The ballroom felt crowded, loud, heavy. She needed a few quiet moments. As she approached the beverage table, she heard voices nearby. Ashley and several bridesmaids. They hadn't noticed her. "Just saying," one woman said, laughing. "She doesn't exactly fit the aesthetic." More laughter. Another voice joined in. "Marcus is sweet, but his family is so different." Ashley sighed dramatically. "You have no idea." Loretta froze. Not intentionally. Her body simply stopped moving. The conversation continued. "It's embarrassing sometimes," Ashley admitted. The words hit harder than she expected. Not because they were shouted, because they weren't. They were casual, careless, honest. The kind of honesty people reveal when they think no one important is listening. One bridesmaid laughed. "At least you'll only see her on holidays." More laughter followed. Loretta quietly stepped backward before anyone noticed her. She returned to her table, sat down, folded her hands, and stared at the candles flickering in the centerpiece. For several moments, she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't think. The pain wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quieter than that. The pain of realizing someone had already decided your worth long before they ever knew you. A server approached. "Would you like more coffee?" Loretta looked up. The young man seemed kind, genuinely kind. She smiled. "Yes, please." The coffee arrived moments later, warm, simple, comforting. She wrapped both hands around the cup. Across the ballroom, she saw Marcus again. This time, he was already looking toward her. Concern flickered briefly across his face, as though he sensed something was wrong. For a second, she considered waving him over, telling him everything, telling him what she heard, telling him how she felt. But she didn't. Because mothers spend a lifetime protecting their children from pain, even when those children become adults, especially then. So she smiled instead, the same smile she had worn all evening. Marcus seemed relieved. He smiled back. Then Ashley appeared beside him, hooked her arm through his, and led him away. Loretta watched them disappear into the crowd. A strange sadness settled over her, not because she disliked Ashley, not even because Ashley disliked her. The sadness came from something else. The growing realization that Marcus saw more than he admitted, and chose silence anyway. The jazz band began another song. Guests returned to dancing. Laughter filled the room. Yet somewhere beneath the music and the champagne and the celebration, tension quietly gathered, like distant thunder before a storm. And at the center of that storm stood Ashley Carlyle, watching, calculating, growing increasingly irritated every time Marcus glanced toward his mother. Because while everyone else saw a perfect wedding, Ashley saw something different. A distraction, an inconvenience, a reminder of a life she believed Marcus should have left behind. And before the night was over, that irritation would become something far more dangerous, because Ashley was already planning a humiliation that would change everything. The reception rolled forward beneath golden lights and carefully rehearsed smiles. Most of the guests never noticed the tension. Why would they? The band was playing. Champagne flowed freely. Servers moved through the ballroom carrying silver trays of desserts. The photographers continued capturing images that looked perfect from every angle. But perfection often hides its cracks beneath bright lighting. Ashley stood near the center of the room speaking with several friends from college. Her smile looked flawless. Her laughter sounded effortless. Yet beneath the polished surface, frustration continued building. Every time Marcus glanced toward his mother, Ashley noticed. Every time he excused himself from a conversation to check whether Loretta needed anything, Ashley noticed. Every time someone complimented Marcus for being kind, respectful, and grounded, Ashley noticed that too. And somehow, in her mind, all roads led back to Loretta. Ashley had spent years carefully constructing the future she wanted. The right neighborhood, the right career, the right social circle, the right image. Marcus fit into that vision beautifully. He was intelligent, successful, handsome, well-liked. The only problem, at least in Ashley's eyes, was where he came from, or more specifically, who he came from. She had never understood why Marcus admired his mother so much. To Ashley, Loretta represented struggle. Small houses, old cars, community kitchens, working-class neighborhoods, everything Ashley had spent her life trying to rise above. What Ashley never understood was that Marcus admired his mother because of her character, not despite her struggles, because of them. But Ashley had spent so many years measuring people by appearances that she no longer recognized the difference. A bridesmaid named Brittany stepped beside her. "You okay?" Ashley took a sip of champagne. "Fine." "You don't look fine." Ashley watched Marcus from across the room. At that moment, he was speaking to an elderly pastor who had known Loretta for years. Both men were laughing. The pastor patted Marcus on the shoulder and pointed toward Loretta's table. Marcus smiled. Ashley felt irritation tighten inside her chest. "Do you ever feel like someone refuses to stay in their place?" she asked. Brittany frowned. "What does that mean?" Ashley shook her head. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Not to her. Across the ballroom, Loretta remained completely unaware of the storm gathering around her. She was speaking with the elderly gentleman seated beside her. The man had introduced himself as Frank. He was Ashley's great-uncle. Apparently nobody remembered to include him in any of the important family seating arrangements either. That fact alone made him and Loretta immediate allies. "You know," Frank said, stirring his coffee, "I've attended 7 weddings in this family." Loretta smiled. 7? 7. What have you learned? Frank leaned back. Expensive weddings don't necessarily create happy marriages. Loretta laughed softly. That's probably true. The old man nodded. Character matters more than money. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The words lingered between them. Simple. True. Almost prophetic. A server approached their table carrying fresh coffee. Loretta thanked him warmly. The young man seemed surprised by the kindness. People often were. Many guests treated hotel staff as if they were part of the furniture. Loretta never did. She had spent too many years working jobs that made people invisible. She knew how much a simple thank you could mean. The server smiled. "Enjoy your evening, ma'am." "You too, sweetheart." The young man walked away grinning. Frank chuckled. "You make people feel seen." Loretta shrugged. Everyone wants to feel seen. Neither realized someone nearby had overheard the exchange. "Marcus." He stood 20 feet away speaking with coworkers. Yet his eyes drifted toward his mother again. And once again, pride softened his expression. Ashley saw that look. The same look she had seen all night. And something inside her finally snapped. Not dramatically, Not visibly, quietly, dangerously, like a crack spreading beneath ice. The cake-cutting ceremony began shortly afterward. Guests gathered near the dance floor. Photographers crowded closer. The enormous 5-tier wedding cake stood beneath a spotlight. Ashley smiled for the cameras. Marcus smiled beside her. Together they sliced the first piece. Applause erupted. Laughter followed. The moment looked perfect, but Ashley barely heard any of it. Her attention remained elsewhere. Her gaze kept returning to the woman sitting behind the column. The woman who refused to disappear. The woman who somehow occupied space without ever demanding attention. The woman Ashley had spent years silently resenting. A plan began forming. Small at first, then larger, then unmistakably deliberate. Nearby, a waiter carrying drinks stopped beside her. Ashley reached for a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. Deep red, expensive, rich. The color looked striking against her white satin dress. An idea appeared, and once it appeared, she couldn't let it go. The opportunity arrived 20 minutes later. Guests had returned to their tables. Music played softly. The ballroom buzzed with conversation. Loretta rose from her chair. She intended to retrieve a fresh napkin and perhaps stretch her legs for a few minutes. Nothing more, nothing unusual. She walked slowly through the crowd, passing floral arrangements, passing cocktail tables, passing groups of laughing guests. At the same moment, Ashley positioned herself near one of the standing tables beside the dance floor. Several bridesmaids stood nearby. A few guests lingered within earshot. Enough witnesses. Not too many. Just enough. Loretta approached from the opposite direction, still several feet away. Not even close enough to touch her. Ashley saw her coming, waited, calculated, then lifted the wine glass. Time seemed to slow. The music continued. Conversations blended into background noise. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. Ashley loosened her grip, tilted the glass, and let it fall against her own gown. The dark red wine splashed across white satin. A stain spread instantly down the front of the dress. Gasps echoed around the room. Several guests jumped to their feet. The wine looked shocking beneath the bright lights. Ashley stared downward, then upward, directly at Loretta. For a single second, nobody spoke. A single second, during which the truth remained visible. People had seen what happened. Several guests had watched the entire thing. They knew Loretta never touched her. They knew Ashley caused it herself. But truth and courage are not always the same thing. Ashley took a sharp breath, then unleashed exactly the reaction she had rehearsed inside her mind. "Look what you did!" The words exploded through the ballroom. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The band stopped playing. The room fell silent. Loretta froze. Confusion crossed her face. "What?" Ashley pointed dramatically at the stain. "My dress!" Several photographers instinctively lifted their cameras. The crowd began gathering. Guests exchanged uncertain glances. Loretta looked down at the ruined gown, then back at Ashley. "Ashley, you ruined my wedding dress." The accusation echoed across the ballroom. Loretta blinked. "Ashley, I wasn't even near. Don't lie." The silence deepened. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others watched eagerly. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody corrected the story. Loretta felt something cold settle inside her stomach. Not fear. Recognition. She suddenly understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't about wine. This wasn't about a dress. It was about humiliation. And Ashley had chosen her target. Across the room, Marcus turned at the sound of shouting. His smile disappeared immediately. Concern filled his face. He started moving through the crowd, but he was still too far away. Too late. Ashley took another step forward. The stain continued spreading across the satin. Her breathing grew louder, her voice sharper. The performance had begun, and everyone in the ballroom was about to become part of it. Because Ashley Carlyle was preparing to cross a line she could never uncross, and before the next few minutes were over, the happiest day of her life would begin collapsing around her. The ballroom had fallen completely silent. Even the musicians sat frozen behind their instruments. The only sound came from the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clink of a champagne glass being set carefully onto a table somewhere in the crowd. Ashley stood beneath the crystal chandeliers, with the stain spreading across the front of her wedding dress. Loretta stood several feet away, calm, confused, heartbroken. Around them, more than 200 guests watched. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to become involved. Ashley pointed directly at Loretta. "You ruined everything." Her voice trembled dramatically. The performance had become larger than the original accusation. This was no longer about wine. Everyone knew it. Even Ashley knew it. The stain on her dress had simply become an excuse, a doorway, a reason to say things she had been wanting to say for years. Loretta took a slow breath. "Ashley, please." The older woman's voice remained gentle. "I know you're upset, but I didn't touch you." Ashley laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp, bitter, dangerous. Still lying. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman near the back quietly whispered to her husband. "I saw what happened." The husband nodded. "So did I." Neither said another word. Like everyone else, they remained silent. Ashley stepped closer. The crowd instinctively parted. "You know what the problem is?" Loretta looked at her without anger, without hatred, without judgment. That somehow made Ashley even angrier. "You've spent years making Marcus feel guilty." The accusation caught everyone off guard. Loretta blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Ashley crossed her arms. "Every sacrifice, every struggle, every sad story." The bride shook her head. "You never stopped reminding him where he came from." The words echoed through the room. Loretta felt something tighten in her chest, not because they were true, because they were so deeply untrue. She had spent her entire life trying to do the opposite, trying to make sure Marcus never carried the burden of her sacrifices, trying to ensure he felt free. Never indebted, never trapped. "Ashley," she said quietly, "I have never asked Marcus for anything." "No." Ashley laughed again. "You didn't have to." The silence grew heavier. Across the ballroom, Marcus was finally pushing through the crowd, but every step seemed painfully slow. The distance between him and his mother had never felt larger. Ashley continued. "You walk around acting humble. Ashley, you sit back there pretending you're above all of this." The bride gestured toward the ballroom. "The truth is, you hate this wedding." Loretta shook her head. "No." "You hate me." "No." "You hate this family." "No." Each answer came softly, steadily, without anger, without raising her voice. Yet Ashley seemed determined not to hear any of them, because people rarely hear the truth when they have already decided on their own version of it. The room watched. The chandeliers glittered overhead. Outside the giant windows, Dallas sparkled beneath the night sky. Inside, something ugly was unfolding beneath all the beauty. Ashley pointed toward Loretta again. "You don't belong here." The words landed hard. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others stared at the floor. Nobody defended Loretta. Nobody objected. Nobody interrupted. And then Ashley made the mistake that would follow her for the rest of her life. She looked around the room, at the guests, at the photographers, at the family members, at the crowd. Then she raised her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've never belonged here." The words echoed against the ballroom walls. Loretta felt her heart break a little. Not because of Ashley. Because of Marcus. She turned her head. Found him in the crowd. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, everything else disappeared. The guests, the music, the lights, the noise. Only mother and son remained. Loretta saw something in his face. Shock, fear, regret. But not action. Not yet. And that hurt more than she could explain. Years earlier, when Marcus was 12, he had stood between her and a man screaming at a grocery store cashier. Marcus had been small, scared, but brave. He had looked at the stranger and said, "Don't talk to my mom like that." The memory flashed through her mind. That little boy seemed very far away now. Ashley followed her gaze. She saw Marcus, and she saw that he still wasn't moving. Something dark flickered across her expression. The certainty of someone who believes she has won. Then it happened. A brief movement. A moment lasting less than a second. The entire ballroom would remember it forever. Ashley stepped forward. Her arm moved sharply. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Then silence. Absolute silence. Loretta stood perfectly still. The room froze. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Even Ashley seemed startled by what she had just done. For a second, reality finally caught up with emotion. And reality was uglier. Loretta slowly lifted her hand to her cheek. Not because she was hurt, because she couldn't quite believe what had happened. The sting faded quickly. The disappointment remained. She looked at Ashley, then looked at Marcus. And in that moment, she realized something. The most painful thing in the room wasn't Ashley's anger. It wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't the crowd. It wasn't even the silence. It was Marcus, still standing there, still frozen, still saying nothing. The little boy who once protected her from everything suddenly looked like a stranger. Marcus finally found his voice. "Ashley." But it came too late. Far too late. The damage had already been done. Loretta lowered her hand. 1,000 emotions moved through her heart. Sadness. Exhaustion. Disappointment. But strangely, not anger. She wasn't angry. She was simply done. Done trying. Done hoping someone else would do the right thing. Done waiting for courage that wasn't coming. A broken champagne flute lay nearby. Someone must have dropped it during the commotion. Loretta bent down, picked up the largest piece carefully, placed it on a nearby serving tray. The small act felt oddly symbolic. Cleaning up a mess she didn't create. Something she had been doing most of her life. When she straightened, every eye remained fixed on her. The room waited, expected, wondered. Would she yell? Would she cry? Would she fight back? Loretta did none of those things. Instead, she smoothed the front of her navy blue dress, lifted her purse, and stood a little taller. The dignity in that simple movement seemed to make everyone else feel smaller. Ashley suddenly looked uncertain. Marcus looked devastated. The guests looked ashamed. Loretta spoke only once. Her voice was calm, quiet, almost gentle. "Congratulations on your wedding." Then she turned. No drama, no scene, no revenge. She simply walked away. The crowd parted automatically. A path opened before her. People stepped aside. Nobody stopped her. Not Ashley, not the Carlyle family, not the guests, and not Marcus. The ballroom doors opened. The sounds of the reception faded behind her. Loretta crossed the marble lobby beneath enormous chandeliers. Each step echoed softly. Outside, the revolving doors spun slowly. Beyond them waited the cool Texas night. She stepped onto the driveway. The air felt colder than before. The city lights shimmered in the distance. For the first time all evening, she was alone. She walked toward a row of decorative palm trees near the edge of the property, then stopped. The night was quiet, far quieter than the ballroom. She closed her eyes, and finally allowed herself to feel what had happened. Not the embarrassment, not the insult, not even the public humiliation. What hurt was Marcus. The image of him standing there, watching, silent. Her eyes filled with tears. Just a few. She quickly brushed them away, then looked up at the stars hidden behind the city glow. "Thomas," she whispered softly. The name disappeared into the night. No answer came. Only the distant sound of traffic moving through downtown Dallas. Loretta took a slow breath. She wanted to go home. Back to Oak Cliff. Back to New Hope. Back to people who measured human worth differently. She reached into her purse for her phone. And that's when she noticed headlights turning into the hotel entrance. At first she thought nothing of it. Just another vehicle. Then another appeared behind it. And another. Dark SUVs moving in formation. Their polished black surfaces reflected the lights of the Grand Meridian. The hotel valets looked up. Security guards straightened. Several guests standing near the entrance turned toward the driveway. The vehicles continued forward. Silent. Precise. Purposeful. Loretta frowned slightly. Something about the scene felt unusual. She had no idea that the next few minutes were about to change everything. Because the fleet of black Escalades wasn't coming to the hotel by accident. It was coming for her. The first SUV rolled beneath the illuminated entrance of the Grand Meridian like a shadow moving through light. Then came the second. Then the third. Their polished black bodies reflected the gold glow of the hotel windows. The vehicles moved slowly, deliberately, with the kind of confidence that didn't need attention because it was already accustomed to it. Loretta stood near the decorative palms, her purse resting against her side. For a moment, she simply watched. The scene felt strangely disconnected from her life. People like her didn't usually have anything to do with fleets of luxury vehicles. Not in Dallas. Not anywhere. The first Escalade stopped. Then the second. Then the third. The engines went silent. A strange stillness settled over the driveway. Behind Loretta, the revolving doors of the hotel turned again. Guests were beginning to spill outside. Word traveled quickly at weddings, especially after a public confrontation. Some came because they were concerned. Others came because they were curious. Most came because human beings have always been drawn to moments they don't fully understand. Marcus emerged from the lobby. His tie hung slightly loose now. His face looked pale beneath the lights. Several yards behind him stood Ashley. The stain on her dress appeared darker in the night air. Her parents followed close behind. Richard Carlyle's expression had hardened. Diane Carlyle looked anxious. Nobody understood what they were seeing. Not yet. The doors of the lead Escalade opened. Two men stepped out. Both wore dark suits. Both carried themselves with quiet discipline. They weren't flashy. They weren't intimidating. But there was something unmistakably professional about them. The kind of confidence that comes from responsibility. One moved toward the hotel entrance. The other remained beside the vehicle. Then, the rear passenger door opened. A third man emerged. Older, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal overcoat. The moment he stepped onto the driveway, the atmosphere changed. Not dramatically, subtly. Yet everyone felt it. Hotel employees straightened. Valets exchanged glances. Even Richard Carlyle seemed to recognize that this was someone accustomed to being listened to. The older man looked around the driveway. His eyes moved across the crowd, past the hotel entrance, past Marcus, past Ashley, past everyone else. Then he saw Loretta, and everything else disappeared. For a second, he simply stood there. The world seemed to stop moving around him. Loretta frowned slightly. There was something familiar about the way he looked at her. Not familiar enough to place, but familiar enough to notice. The man started walking, not toward the hotel, not toward the crowd, toward her. His pace gradually quickened. The people watching instinctively stepped aside. The driveway had become silent again. Even the distant sounds of traffic seemed to fade. Marcus stopped walking. Ashley folded her arms tightly across her chest. Nobody spoke. The older man finally reached Loretta. For several seconds, he simply looked at her. His eyes glistened beneath the hotel lights. Emotion moved across his face so openly that it startled everyone watching. Relief, gratitude, disbelief. The expression of someone finally finding something he had been searching for. Then, to the astonishment of every person present, he lowered his head. Not a casual nod, not a greeting, a genuine bow. Small, respectful, deeply sincere. Gasps spread through the crowd. Richard Carlyle's eyes widened. Ashley stared in confusion. Marcus looked completely lost. The silver-haired man raised his head again. His voice came quietly, but every word carried through the still night air. Mrs. Johnson. Loretta blinked. The voice touched something buried deep in memory. A fragment. A hospital room. A winter storm. A promise. The man smiled, and suddenly she saw it. Not the expensive coat, not the polished appearance, not the confident posture. She saw the eyes. The same eyes she had once seen beneath layers of exhaustion and despair. Older now, healthier, stronger, but unmistakably the same. The realization hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. The man smiled again. Hello, Loretta. For a moment she couldn't speak. 8 years vanished. The alley behind New Hope. The snow, the soup, the hospital, the promise. Every memory returned at once. William? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. The man's smile widened. Yes. A stunned silence swept through the crowd. Marcus looked from one face to the other. Confusion covered his features. Ashley frowned. The name meant nothing to her, yet somehow she already sensed it meant everything. William Harper laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because after 8 years, he finally stood before the woman who had changed his life. You remembered me. Loretta shook her head in disbelief. Of course I remembered you. The emotion in William's eyes deepened. For a second, he seemed unable to speak. Then he took a slow breath. I searched for you. The crowd exchanged confused looks. William continued. For years. Loretta stared at him. What happened to you? The question escaped before she could stop it. William smiled. A lot. A few guests moved closer. Nobody wanted to miss a word now. Ashley remained frozen. Marcus stepped nearer. The distance between himself and his mother suddenly felt very important. William glanced briefly toward the crowd, then back to Loretta. You saved my life. The statement landed heavily. Several people looked at one another. Saved his life? Loretta immediately shook her head. No, William. You did. His voice grew firmer. You absolutely did. The silver-haired man looked around the driveway. His gaze swept across the guests who had watched Loretta leave the ballroom alone, across the people who had remained silent, across the people who had judged her without knowing her. Then he looked back at Loretta. I owe every day of my life after that winter to you. The words hung in the night air. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Because everyone could feel something enormous approaching, something bigger than the wedding, bigger than the Carlyle family, bigger than the humiliation inside the ballroom. William Harper wasn't here by accident, and the story connecting him to Loretta Johnson was about to turn the entire evening upside down. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom. Loretta looked at her son, then back at William, then at the 3 black Escalades waiting silently beneath the lights. Nothing about this felt real. Not yet. William smiled gently. I think it's time everyone learned the truth. And as dozens of guests gathered beneath the glowing entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel, Ashley Carlyle suddenly felt a knot tighten in her stomach. For the first time all night, she wasn't angry. She was afraid. Because something told her that the woman she had humiliated wasn't standing alone anymore. And the next few minutes were about to reveal exactly who William Harper had become. The driveway of the Grand Meridian Hotel had become quieter than the ballroom had ever been. Guests clustered beneath the entrance canopy. Valets stood frozen beside luxury cars. Even hotel staff lingering near the revolving doors seemed unwilling to leave. Nobody wanted to miss what came next. William Harper looked at Loretta Johnson as though the rest of the world had temporarily disappeared. 8 years. 8 years of searching. 8 years of unfinished gratitude. 8 years of carrying a debt that money could never fully repay. And now she was standing in front of him again, wearing a simple navy blue dress, the same quiet dignity, the same kind eyes, the same woman. Loretta still looked overwhelmed. The entire situation felt impossible. She glanced at the Escalades, then at William, then back toward the hotel. The pieces refused to fit together. The man she remembered had been hungry, lost, broken. The man standing before her now looked like someone who owned entire city blocks. William seemed to read the confusion on her face. A faint smile touched his lips. You have questions? Loretta laughed softly. I think everybody here has questions. A nervous ripple moved through the crowd. The tension eased slightly. William nodded. Fair enough. He turned toward the gathered guests, toward Marcus, toward Ashley, toward the Carlyle family. The silver-haired billionaire seemed completely comfortable standing beneath hundreds of eyes. Not arrogant, not boastful, simply accustomed to attention. A man who had spent years speaking in boardrooms and conference halls. But when he looked back at Loretta, something changed. His expression softened, almost immediately. The contrast was striking. You found me in a snowstorm. The words floated through the night. Loretta smiled faintly. You looked terrible. Laughter spread through the crowd. Even William laughed. That's a generous description. The guests relaxed slightly, but only slightly. Everyone still sensed something significant approaching. Marcus stepped closer. His face remained pale. "Mom never told me about you." William turned toward him. For several seconds, he studied Marcus carefully. Then he smiled. "You must be Marcus." The younger man nodded. William extended his hand. Marcus shook it automatically. The billionaire's grip was firm, steady, respectful. "Your mother talks about you the way people talk about miracles." Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes immediately drifted toward Loretta. Guilt flashed across his face. The words landed heavily after everything that had happened inside the ballroom. Loretta looked away. Not angry, just tired. William noticed. He noticed everything. The mark of humiliation still lingering in the atmosphere. The discomfort among the guests. The strained expressions. The silence that surrounded certain people. He had spent decades reading rooms. Tonight's room was easy to read. Something ugly had happened here, and everyone knew it. William turned back toward Loretta. "What happened after I left the hospital?" The question surprised her. She laughed softly. "Life happened." The billionaire smiled. "Tell me." Loretta hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to discussing herself. Most of her conversations focused on other people, not her own story. But William waited patiently, so she told him, briefly, about New Hope Community Kitchen, about the years of volunteer work, about helping veterans, about feeding families, about keeping the doors open whenever donations ran low. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic, simply the life she had lived. The crowd listened, more quietly than before. And with every sentence, something subtle changed. People who had dismissed Loretta began seeing her differently. Not because of William, because of her. The realization made many of them uncomfortable, Ashley especially. She stood near the entrance, clutching her arms tightly across her chest. Her stained wedding dress suddenly felt ridiculous, small, meaningless. The attention she had commanded inside the ballroom was gone, completely gone. Nobody cared about the dress anymore. Nobody cared about the wedding. Nobody cared about her. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Ashley found herself standing outside the center of the story, and she hated it. William eventually looked back toward the crowd. Then he said something that instantly changed the atmosphere again. "I suppose I should explain who I am." Nobody breathed. Even Richard Carlisle leaned slightly forward. William Harper was not an unknown name in Texas, but not everyone had immediately recognized him. Now several guests exchanged startled glances. The realization spread rapidly. Like a spark catching dry grass, one whisper became 2, then 10, then 20. William Harper, Harper Logistics, Harper Freight Systems, Harper Ports, Harper Infrastructure. One of the wealthiest businessmen in the state. Several guests visibly stiffened. A woman near the entrance covered her mouth. A man in a tailored suit quietly muttered a curse under his breath. Ashley's father suddenly looked as though someone had poured ice water down his back. Because he knew exactly who William Harper was, and more importantly, he knew how powerful William Harper was. The billionaire continued calmly. 8 years ago, I disappeared. The crowd remained silent. I suffered a serious accident. He paused. Physical injuries, memory loss, a great deal of confusion. Nobody interrupted. I spent months drifting through a life I no longer understood. The words sounded honest, painfully honest. My family couldn't find me. A ripple of surprise moved through the guests. My company couldn't find me. Another ripple. My friends couldn't find me. William looked at Loretta. But she did. The driveway fell silent again. The billionaire pointed gently toward her. This woman fed me when I had nothing. He paused. Helped me when nobody else stopped. Another pause. Paid my hospital expenses when she could barely afford her own. A collective gasp spread through the crowd. Marcus stared at his mother, completely stunned. Ashley's face drained of color. William's voice softened. She didn't ask who I was. The billionaire shook his head. She didn't ask what I could offer. His eyes moved slowly across the guests. She didn't ask whether helping me would benefit her. Nobody could look away. She simply helped. The words seemed to settle over everyone present. Heavy, unavoidable. True. William took a slow breath, then smiled. And because she did, I eventually found my way back. The billionaire spread one hand toward the Escalades, toward the security team, toward the success surrounding him. Everything you see tonight exists because I got a second chance. His gaze returned to Loretta, and I got that second chance because of her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence felt completely different now. Not awkward. Reverent. The kind of silence that appears when people suddenly realize they have misjudged someone. Ashley felt her stomach drop. The feeling intensified with every passing second, because she could see it happening. The crowd was changing. The narrative was changing. The balance of power was changing, and she no longer controlled any of it. William took one final step toward Loretta. His voice became quieter, almost personal. Mrs. Johnson. Loretta smiled. You don't have to call me that. I do. The billionaire's eyes glistened. Because I've waited 8 years to say thank you properly. And standing beneath the lights of the Grand Meridian Hotel, surrounded by stunned wedding guests and a fleet of black Escalades, William Harper was finally about to reveal just how far he had come, and just how much he intended to repay the woman who had once saved his life. The Texas night felt different now. The air itself seemed heavier, charged, alive. Nobody was thinking about the wedding anymore. Not the flowers, not the music, not the ruined dress, not even the reception waiting inside the ballroom. Everything had shifted. Every conversation, every assumption, every judgment. William Harper stood beside Loretta Johnson beneath the entrance canopy, and for the first time all evening, people were seeing her clearly. Not as the woman sitting behind a column, not as the mother nobody wanted at the front table, not as the target of humiliation. They were seeing the person she had always been. The realization was uncomfortable, especially for the people who had helped create the night's cruelty. William slowly reached into his coat pocket. He removed a folded handkerchief. Then, with a gentleness that stunned everyone watching, he offered it to Loretta. Your mascara, Loretta laughed softly, only then realizing her eyes were damp. You always were observant. William smiled. No. His voice lowered. You taught me to start paying attention. The simple exchange somehow carried more power than a speech, because it revealed something the crowd hadn't expected. This wasn't a billionaire rewarding a stranger. This was gratitude. Real gratitude. The kind that survives years. Marcus stood nearby, listening. Every word felt like another weight settling onto his shoulders. The picture forming before him was impossible to ignore. His mother had quietly changed a man's life, saved him, helped him, never mentioned it, never used it, never asked for recognition. And tonight, he had stood silent while she was publicly humiliated. The realization hurt. It should have. Across the driveway, Ashley could feel the attention slipping further from her grasp. For years, she had known exactly how to navigate social situations. She knew what to say, what to wear, how to appear confident, how to stay in control. Tonight, none of those skills were helping. Because for the first time, appearance wasn't winning. Character was, and character was a contest she was losing badly. William turned toward the crowd. His expression remained calm, professional. Yet beneath it rested unmistakable disappointment. Not anger, disappointment. The kind that somehow felt worse. I arrived earlier than expected. Nobody interrupted. My team informed me there had been an incident. His eyes moved briefly toward the ballroom, then toward Ashley, then toward Marcus, then back toward Loretta. They also informed me that Mrs. Johnson was leaving alone. Silence. William nodded slowly. I found that difficult to understand. Nobody spoke. Because nobody had a good explanation. Richard Carlyle cleared his throat, attempting to regain some control. Mr. Harper, I'm sure there has been a misunderstanding. William looked at him. The billionaire's gaze remained polite, but it carried enough weight to stop the sentence halfway through. Richard fell silent. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. People listened anyway. I've spent years in business. He paused. I've negotiated billion-dollar contracts. Another pause. I've sat across tables from governors, CEOs, investors, and politicians. The guests exchanged glances. Many of them knew that was true. William Harper wasn't merely wealthy. He was influential. The kind of influential that rarely appeared in newspapers because it operated behind them. Yet his next words had nothing to do with business. The most valuable person I've ever met worked in a community kitchen. The silence deepened. William looked at Loretta, then back at the crowd. Because she understood something most successful people forget. Nobody moved. Human worth isn't measured by status. The words hung in the air. It isn't measured by money. Another pause. It isn't measured by invitations, seating charts, neighborhoods, or last names. Ashley looked down. The words felt uncomfortably specific, because they were. William continued. It is measured by how you treat people who can offer you nothing. Nobody could look away. Not anymore. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others stared at the pavement. The truth had become unavoidable. The night suddenly felt like a mirror, and many people disliked what they saw reflected. Ashley finally stepped forward. The movement was hesitant, uncertain. Nothing like the confidence she had displayed inside the ballroom. Ashley, Diane whispered. But her daughter kept walking. The stained wedding dress swayed softly around her feet. For the first time all evening, Ashley looked young, not glamorous, not sophisticated, just young and frightened. She stopped several feet from Loretta. Everyone watched, waiting. Ashley swallowed, then tried to speak. Nothing came out. She tried again. I'm sorry. The words sounded fragile, almost unfamiliar. Loretta said nothing. William said nothing. The guests said nothing. Ashley looked directly at Loretta. I was wrong. Still silence. Tears appeared in Ashley's eyes. Real ones this time. Not performance. Not manipulation. At least not entirely. Fear and shame had finally broken through her certainty. I shouldn't have said those things. Her voice trembled. I shouldn't have treated you that way. The driveway remained quiet. Ashley looked desperately from Loretta to William, searching for something. Forgiveness, validation, relief, anything. William studied her for several seconds. Then he asked a question. A simple question. A devastating one. The same question he had been carrying since the moment he stepped out of the Escalade. If I wasn't standing here tonight, Ashley froze. William's voice remained calm. If Mrs. Johnson was exactly who you believed she was this afternoon. Another pause. A retired kitchen volunteer. Another. A widow from Oak Cliff. Another. A woman without influence. The billionaire looked directly into her eyes. Would you still be apologizing? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody rescued her. Because there was no rescue available. The driveway seemed to shrink around the silence. Ashley opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer existed. Everyone knew it, including Ashley. Especially Ashley. But saying it aloud would make it real. So she remained silent, and the silence answered for her. William slowly nodded, not cruelly, not triumphantly, simply acknowledging the truth. Loretta closed her eyes briefly. The question had exposed something deeper than arrogance. It had exposed motive. And motive is difficult to hide once revealed. Ashley lowered her head. For perhaps the first time in her life, she genuinely understood shame. Not embarrassment. Not inconvenience. Shame. The painful recognition that she had become the kind of person she never believed herself capable of being. Marcus watched everything. Every second. Every word. Every silence. And somewhere inside him, something finally broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way important realizations often arrive. He looked at Ashley, then at his mother, then at the ground. Because William's question wasn't only for Ashley, it was for him too. Would he have spoken up if William Harper never arrived? Would he have defended his mother if nobody powerful was watching? The answer hurt. Because he knew it. And so did everyone else. The silence lingered, heavy, uncomfortable, necessary. Then William stepped back slightly, giving the moment room to breathe, giving people room to confront themselves. And as the driveway stood suspended beneath the lights of the Grand Meridian Hotel, Marcus Johnson realized that the hardest conversation of the night was still ahead of him. Because a billionaire had exposed Ashley's truth. But Marcus still had to face his own. The driveway remained silent long after William Harper's question had been answered. Not by words. By silence. The most honest answer Ashley Carlyle had given all night. Nobody rushed to fill the emptiness. Nobody offered excuses. Not even Ashley's parents. The truth stood there beneath the lights of the Grand Meridian Hotel, exposed for everyone to see. And now another truth waited its turn. Marcus Johnson felt it settling around him. Heavy. Unavoidable. The cool Texas air suddenly felt difficult to breathe. For hours he had been telling himself that everything happened too fast, that he had been shocked, that he hadn't known what to do, that there had been confusion. But excuses have a short life when standing beside truth, and tonight truth was everywhere. His mother stood only a few feet away, still composed, still dignified, still carrying herself with the same quiet strength she had carried his entire life. The sight of her broke something inside him. Because for the first time all evening, Marcus stopped seeing the woman standing before him. Instead, he saw every version of her that came before. He saw a 39-year-old widow working 2 jobs. He saw a mother falling asleep at the kitchen table over unpaid bills. He saw a woman waiting in the rain outside football practice because her son needed a ride home. He saw school lunches packed before dawn, Christmas presents bought through sacrifice, doctor visits postponed because money was tight. He saw every invisible act of love that had built his life, and he saw himself standing motionless while that woman was publicly humiliated. The realization hit harder than anything Ashley had said. Marcus lowered his head. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then he started walking. One step, then another. The crowd parted automatically. William stepped aside. Loretta remained still. Marcus stopped directly in front of her. His eyes were red. His voice refused to cooperate. Several attempts failed before words finally emerged. "Mom." The single word cracked. Years seemed to collapse into that moment. Loretta looked at him quietly. Not coldly, not warmly. Simply honestly. Marcus swallowed. "I'm sorry." The words sounded painfully small. He immediately hated them, because sorry felt inadequate, ridiculously inadequate. A child apologizes for spilling milk. A man apologizes for forgetting an anniversary. But what word existed for standing silent while your mother suffered? Marcus didn't know, and that ignorance made him feel even worse. "I should have done something." His voice trembled. "I should have stopped it." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The driveway belonged entirely to mother and son now. Marcus looked down, ashamed. I saw what was happening. Another pause, and I froze. His shoulders sagged. I don't know why. Loretta remained silent. The silence forced him forward, forced him deeper, toward honesty. I kept thinking I should step in. His voice broke again, and every second I waited made it harder. Tears appeared, real tears, the kind grown men spend years learning how to hide. Tonight, there was no point. Not anymore. I failed you. The words finally arrived. Simple. Direct. True. For several seconds, Loretta studied her son's face. The little boy. The teenager. The man. All three seemed present at once, and beneath her sadness, something else existed too. Love. The stubborn kind that survives disappointment, the kind mothers carry whether they want to or not. Marcus looked up, waiting, hoping, terrified. The verdict mattered, more than anything. Loretta finally spoke. Her voice was calm, soft, yet somehow powerful enough to silence the entire driveway. The slap didn't hurt me. Marcus closed his eyes. He already knew what was coming, and somehow that made it worse. Loretta continued. Watching you stand there did. The words landed with devastating precision. No anger, no accusation, just truth. Marcus physically flinched. Not because she raised her voice, because she didn't. Because she didn't need to. Truth rarely requires volume. A tear rolled down his cheek, then another. For several seconds he couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't look at anyone. Everything he feared was contained inside that one sentence. And it was deserved. Completely deserved. Around them, several guests quietly looked away. Others lowered their heads. Even William Harper stared at the ground. Because everybody understood what Loretta meant. The deepest wounds often come from the people we trust most. Marcus finally nodded. Slowly. Painfully. I know. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I know. Loretta watched him struggle. Watched him carry the weight. Part of her wanted to rescue him, to soften the moment, to tell him it wasn't that bad. But she didn't. Some lessons only work when they are allowed to hurt, not out of cruelty, out of love, because growth requires honesty. Eventually, Marcus looked back up. What do I do now? The question sounded almost childlike, the same question he used to ask after making mistakes as a boy. Loretta remembered those moments. The scraped knees, broken lamps, bad report cards, the frightened expression, the hope that she would tell him how to fix everything. Back then, she always had an answer. Tonight was different. Some things couldn't be fixed immediately. Some things required time, character, action. Loretta reached forward, placed her hand gently against his cheek. The gesture nearly broke him. What matters isn't that you stood still. Marcus listened carefully. Every word. What matters is what you do next. The sentence settled between them. Simple. Powerful. A path forward. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But possibility. Marcus nodded, slowly. Then suddenly stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. The embrace was desperate, unsteady. The embrace of a man holding on to something precious he almost lost. Loretta hugged him back. The years disappeared again. Not completely, but enough. Around them, nobody spoke. Several guests wiped away tears. Others simply watched. Because despite everything that had happened, something beautiful was unfolding. Not perfection, something better. Truth. Ashley stood near the entrance watching the embrace. The sight hurt. Not because she wasn't included, because she finally understood what she had never understood before. The bond between Marcus and his mother had never been based on obligation, or guilt, or history. It had been built through sacrifice, through love, through decades of showing up. Something money couldn't purchase, something status couldn't manufacture, and something she had foolishly tried to compete with. The realization left her feeling hollow. Richard Carlyle approached quietly. His face looked older than it had earlier that evening. Ashley. She didn't answer. Ashley. Finally, she looked at him. What? Richard glanced toward Marcus and Loretta, then toward the ballroom. The music had long since stopped. The celebration was over. Everyone knew it, even if nobody wanted to say it aloud. What happens now? Ashley stared at her father. For once, she had no answer. The perfect future she imagined that morning felt impossibly distant. Marcus eventually stepped back from his mother. His eyes remained wet, his face exhausted. Yet something had changed. Something important. The paralysis was gone. The uncertainty was gone. The illusion was gone. Only truth remained. He turned slowly, looked toward the hotel entrance, toward Ashley, toward the ballroom beyond, toward the reception still waiting inside. Then he spoke, quietly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. I'm not going back in there. The words echoed through the night. Ashley stared at him. Several guests gasped. Diane Carlyle covered her mouth. Richard's face hardened immediately. Marcus. But Marcus shook his head. No. His voice remained calm, resolved. What happened tonight isn't something I can celebrate. Silence followed. Then more silence, because everybody understood. The wedding might technically be complete. The vows spoken, the papers signed. But something essential had shattered, and as the lights of the Grand Meridian glowed behind them, Marcus Johnson finally chose a side. Not wealth, not appearances, not convenience. His mother. And though nobody realized it yet, that choice would become the first step toward rebuilding the life he nearly lost. The night at the Grand Meridian Hotel eventually came to an end. Not with dancing, not with celebration, not with fireworks or champagne toasts. The reception quietly dissolved. Guests drifted away in small groups. The ballroom emptied. The musicians packed their instruments. The wedding cake remained mostly untouched. By midnight, only hotel staff remained inside, clearing tables beneath chandeliers that suddenly felt far too large for such a broken evening. Outside, under the Texas stars, Loretta Johnson sat with Marcus and William Harper around a small courtyard table. Someone from the hotel had brought coffee. Nobody had asked. Sometimes kindness appears in unexpected places. The three of them sat together long after most guests had gone home. And for the first time in years, Marcus listened, really listened. Loretta told stories she had never shared before. Stories about his father, stories about sacrifice, stories about fear, stories about hope. The kind of stories parents often protect their children from, not because they are ashamed, because they want their children to carry lighter burdens. Marcus listened to every word. The city hummed quietly around them. Traffic moved through downtown Dallas. The fountain in the courtyard splashed softly nearby. The night seemed determined to slow down. William listened too, sometimes smiling, sometimes laughing, sometimes growing silent. Several times he caught himself simply watching Loretta, still amazed that after all these years, she remained exactly who she had always been. The same woman who had offered soup to a stranger. The same woman who had paid a hospital bill without expecting repayment. The same woman who measured success differently than the rest of the world. Around 2 a.m, William finally stood. "I should let you two talk." Marcus rose immediately. "So should I." But William shook his head. "No." A small smile crossed his face. "I've had 8 years." He looked at Loretta. "You deserve this conversation." The billionaire stepped away toward the waiting Escalades. For a moment, Marcus watched him go, then looked back at his mother. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable now. Healing often begins that way, not with words, with space. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "What happens now?" Loretta smiled softly. "You tell me." He looked down. For the first time all evening, he wasn't searching for answers from someone else. He was searching inside himself. And that was progress. A year passed. The seasons changed. Spring arrived. Then summer. Then autumn. Life moved forward the way life always does. Not perfectly, not quickly, but steadily. Marcus and Ashley separated permanently within months of the wedding. The decision hurt. But not because Marcus doubted it. Because accepting reality always hurts, even when reality is necessary. Ashley eventually left Dallas. Friends heard she moved to another city, started over. No one spoke badly about her, not even Loretta, especially not Loretta, because bitterness had never been part of her character. The lesson had already been learned. Nothing more needed to be added. Marcus focused on rebuilding, not his reputation, his character. The distinction mattered. He volunteered at New Hope Community Kitchen every Saturday. At first, because he felt guilty. Later, because he genuinely wanted to be there. The kitchen changed him. Or perhaps it reminded him who he had once been. He served meals, washed dishes, stacked chairs, listened to stories. Slowly, the distance between mother and son disappeared. Not all at once. Trust rarely works that way. But week by week, conversation by conversation, act by act. Meanwhile, William Harper kept his promise. Not with gifts, not with mansions, not with luxury cars, because he eventually understood that those things held little value to Loretta. Instead, he invested in her mission, the mission she had already devoted her life to. 1 year after the wedding, New Hope Community Kitchen reopened after a major expansion. The old building remained. Loretta insisted on that. The original brick walls still stood. The original sign still hung above the entrance. But everything else had grown. A larger dining hall, additional classrooms, medical outreach rooms, job training facilities, counseling services, resources for veterans, resources for single parents, resources for teenagers aging out of foster care. What had once served hundreds now served thousands. The ribbon-cutting ceremony attracted local reporters. City officials attended. Community leaders arrived. Television cameras appeared. Everyone wanted to meet the woman responsible. Everyone wanted photographs. Everyone wanted interviews. Loretta politely declined most of them. That surprised people. It shouldn't have. She had never done the work for recognition. She wasn't about to start now. On a bright October afternoon, sunlight poured through the windows of the new community center. Children laughed in one room. Volunteers prepared meals in another. A job skills workshop was taking place upstairs. The building felt alive. Purpose echoed through every hallway. William Harper stood near the entrance, speaking with donors. Marcus reviewed paperwork in a nearby office. Several reporters waited hopefully for interviews. And Loretta? Loretta carried a tray of food, exactly as she always had. A new visitor entered the building. An older man, thin, tired, clearly struggling. He paused uncertainly near the doorway, the same way countless others had paused before him, not sure whether they belonged, not sure whether they would be welcomed. Loretta immediately noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed. She walked toward him carrying the tray. The man looked embarrassed. I don't want to be a burden. Loretta smiled. The same smile that had comforted thousands. The same smile that had once comforted a lost man in a snowstorm. The same smile that had survived humiliation, heartbreak, sacrifice, and forgiveness. You aren't. The man looked relieved. She handed him the tray. Warm food, fresh bread, coffee, dignity, the things people need most. William watched from across the room. A smile slowly spread across his face. After all the money, after all the success, after all the years, the most important thing in the building remained unchanged. Loretta Johnson. Marcus stood nearby watching too. His eyes drifted toward his mother, then toward the people she helped, then toward the life she had built. And finally, he understood something he should have understood years ago. The strongest person he had ever known wasn't a billionaire, wasn't a CEO, wasn't a politician. It was his mother. The woman who had spent decades giving away kindness she could barely afford. The afternoon sun filled the room with golden light. Outside, Texas traffic rolled past. Inside, life continued. Not glamorous, not famous, meaningful. William eventually walked over and stood beside Loretta. Neither spoke for a moment. They simply watched people eating together, talking, laughing, healing. The things that mattered. Finally, William smiled. You changed my life. Loretta laughed softly. No. She looked around the room, at the volunteers, at the families, at Marcus, at the people receiving help, then back at William. We changed each other's. William nodded. Perhaps she was right. The old man receiving lunch looked up. Thank you. Loretta smiled warmly. And in that moment, the room felt exactly the right size. Not because of money, not because of power, not because of influence, because it was filled with purpose, filled with kindness, filled with people who mattered. The woman who had once been humiliated and sent away from a wedding was now respected throughout the city. Not because a billionaire had appeared, not because of headlines, not because of attention, because she had spent a lifetime choosing compassion when nobody was watching. The late afternoon sunlight illuminated the room. A gentle warmth settled over everyone inside. And as Loretta handed another meal to someone in need, she smiled and said the words that would stay with Marcus forever. You never know whose life a small act of kindness will save tomorrow. The room carried on around her. Simple, beautiful, human. And for the first time in a very long time, everything felt exactly as it should. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness today can change someone's entire life tomorrow. Think about that final moment when Loretta handed a meal to a struggling stranger in the expanded New Hope community kitchen, the same way she once handed soup to William Harper during a snowstorm when nobody else stopped. In the end, the thing that changed the most lives wasn't William's fortune. It was Loretta's decision to care when no one was watching.
This story reminds us that some of the most important people in our life may be people we never expect to matter. The stranger you have today, the person everyone else overlooks, may carry a story you never fully know, and your kindness may stay with them for longer than you imagined. Today, think about one person you usually pass by without really seeing. Maybe it's a neighbor, a cashier, a lonely friend, or someone struggling quietly. Take a moment to ask how they're doing, the way Loretta did. Sometimes a simple conversation can matter more than you can rely. Have you ever had a stranger and never found out what happened to them afterward? Tell me in the comment below. I love to hear your story. And in our next video, we'll meet another ordinary person whose single choice changed far more life than anyone could have imagined.